take the opportunity to talk about the title that's displayed. So I have about 20 minutes to cover this subject. And I could either go two ways. One is to go into a very specific area and give details, and maybe talk about a more of a broad view of the subject. So I chose to do the latter. And it seems like most of you that grow corn, you probably get to the point where you think it's normal, maybe it is, for corn to come up green, turn yellow, and then hopefully turn green again. Well, that may be normal, but it's not desirable. And so we'll talk about a few things that maybe minimize the impact of yellow corn and wheat as well. So here's the basic topics I want to cover. I want to focus on wheat and corn, on nitrogen, sulfur, and then a bit on zinc as well in corn specifically. So I want to review NDSU's recommendations, show you pictures of deficiency symptoms. Hopefully you haven't seen these before, you see them on slides instead of in your field. But anyway, we'll show you the deficiency symptoms, and then along with this, talk about post-application, either something you're planning, maybe you're splitting your application then, maybe a bulk of it up front at planting time and the rest early season, or maybe you just need to make a rescue treatment. So I'll talk about those as well. This was in the current Ag Lice newsletter. This is fall 2014. I thought this might be a nice way to start the discussion. This quote came from Ron Gelderman. Ron is from South Dakota State University. He's around for a long time. He just recently retired. We had him in North Dakota last winter talking about starter fertilizer. And anyway, the rule of thumb is that at the end of the season, if we have low soil land, it very likely means that we lost some yield. And the rule of thumb actually is that in the fall, after the crop is taken off, we take our fall soil nitrate tests. If they're indicating less than, well, in particular less than 30 pounds per acre, it's very likely we lost some yield, either with corn or wheat, and maybe with wheat we also lost some protein as well. And I'm sure there's at least one person in the room that had wheat last year that weren't thrilled with their protein level on their wheat. And then in the newsletter we had this graph just showing the average nitrate and level in the fall following wheat. And so you can look through the years. You got an arrow to point out 2004, and this is a big area that all samples submitted from all over the region. And so it doesn't mean much for your farm, but I guess the take-home message is, you know, this is average. Think of the number of fields that were below 32, which would maybe fit in this category. You know, the first step is soil sampling would be very good in the fall to determine, you know, how you did with the crop, and then of course make plans for 2015. Yes, we do have a circular on fertilizing harvest spring wheat. It was revised a few years ago. I know you guys have heard the story about it. And I don't have hard copies here today, but your extension agent can get those for you, or they're readily available electronically. And then we also have the electronic nitrogen calculator for wheat. That's kind of fun to play with. You just push a few buttons, your region, and previous crop, and there's quite a few other selections. But very quickly, it'll give you a recommendation to start your plans for 2015 wheat. In the circular, the hard copy, there is a lot of tables. There's actually 9 tables. They're based on a number of things, starting with locations in the state, west, east, and then the Langdon area. But I chose this one. This is eastern North Dakota with median productivity from 40 to 60 bushel. Now this will be for the guys that aren't here today. They have just medium yields. You know, you guys all have high yields, right? So I probably should have selected another chart. I'll use this one just for example. So in here, very simply, we use the wheat price and then that year cost on the active amount of nitrogen per pound. And so it's probably going to be in this area, 140 to 150 total amount of N that we'd like to have you available for the upcoming crop. And I'm going to deduct credits for the previous crops, such as soybean or dry bean, and then also credits for soil test levels, your residual nitrate. And so very likely you could be applying under 100 pounds. The question is too, how about split applications? Do I need to apply it all at planting time, or could I save some, see how the season starts out, and then add extra N if needed? And the simple answer is NDSU has done a fair amount of work comparing all pre-plant application versus the split. And the splits typically are 2/3 at planting, another third post, or it might be 75-25, I guess whatever ratio you like. But in general, we haven't seen consistent advantages with the split, and except under irrigation, where we know that we have end losses. You can go with the strategy of the pre-plant followed by post, but beware the risks, and there's quite a few. For one, we have a very short period from the time that crop comes up until the jointing stage. And ideally, the post application should be made before tillering starts, but definitely before jointing, which is the 5.5 leaf stage. Do you have the manpower to go across the field when you're going across lots of other fields, and equipment? Will Mother Nature cooperate with you? Will we get the rain to move that end in that you're applying? So just some things to think about, and I think you guys are probably well aware of that. So corn, we have a brand new guide on fertilizer recommendations that just came out last July. And we've been doing a fair amount of field work to build the database, in particular for N, to give you some revised recommendations. And that's the focus of this guide. It talks about other elements, but N is the key. I do have a pile of the circulars on this table, so grab one if you don't have one. And then keep in mind that we do have an electronic version, just like with the wheat. So just look in the guide a bit. This is table 6 that would fit fairly well for this region in North Dakota. Medium textured soils in the eastern part of the state with historic yields that consistently around or less than 160 bushel. And if this table doesn't fit you, we do have others that will. This is supposed to make things more complicated, but look, is that complicated? Not really. 150 pounds is what you need. Well, not exactly. Because what this indicates is that the rate isn't nearly as important as the timing of the application in these type of soils as we did the work over the last 3 to 4, 5 years. We're finding that these soils, medium textured with lower yield, there's a lower yield for a reason. That's because of our lighter, lower organic soils and heavy rains that we've experienced. We're losing a lot of N. And so we have to do something different. So this 150 is a starting point. We could consider that amount at planting time. Again, we can deduct for the credits for the previous crops, such as soybean, and then the residual nitrate N that we have. But we'd also strongly encourage you to start thinking about side dressing N. And so what rate do we use, or when do we do the side dressing? I'll cover those in a bit. Eventually, and it's not going to be in 2015, maybe not even 2016, we'll have the technology. In fact, the technology is here. It's just putting it in the field is the challenge. We'll have active optical sensors to help fine-tune the amount of N we apply early in the season. If any of you have heard Dave Franson, he's been talking about that a lot, and he'll continue to do that, talk about this new high technology to be as accurate with the N application and use as possible. So in here it talks about, well, the amount to apply post-emergence is the difference between this table, that's 150, and the table in table 5. So here's table 5, and here's the corresponding market price of corn, $3 is what he used, and then the cost of N, 40 to 50 cents per pound of actual N. And so ultimately, about 50 pounds would be something to consider for that post-application, assuming that you're confident you don't have all the N there that you placed at the start of the planting season. We've been doing a fair amount of work, but here's just one very simple example, and this is from a trial that we conducted here at the Center this past growing season. It was a trial where we looked at row spacing and then starter fertilizer application. We had 150 pounds of total N available at planting time. It was a combination of previous crop EMPs, some 30-some pounds of residual nitrate, nitrogen, and we applied urea and had it rained in almost immediately. So I'm very confident we had 150 pounds available at planting time and actually through the season. We just didn't have any heavy rains where I was concerned about denitrification or leaching below the root system. And then We made an application at the 4-leaf stage with about 50 pounds of actual N as UAN with screen nozzles. And the day after, we got 0.6 of an inch of rain. So we don't always get that lucky, but in this case, the weather really cooperated with us. And so ultimately, here's what happened. Statistically, not a yield increase, but at least numerically, we saw a trend for a bump. And so I think that's very positive. If we'd had conditions where we lost N soon after planting, very likely we'd have seen even more of a substantial increase in yield. So this simple example just shows that these tables might just be accurate after all. Most of you maybe have seen this table. This is uptake of N based on the growth stage of corn. And so we do have time. We have, 4 to 6 weeks after the plant emerges before the N uptake greatly increases. But do we really have that amount of time? Well, we do, but remember, what we plan on paper doesn't always happen in the field. So we can apply late, but ideally, the V4 to V6 stage would be good, assuming we make the application and of course have moisture to move it in the soil if we're not directly placing the N in the soil. So this is an area we can spend a lot of time on, and but we do have insurance policies. So ultimately, our very simple goal is to have all that N available to the plant just before that rapid uptake period. So if we can have the total amount of N the plant needs to give us whatever our yield potential is, if we had it right here and had all of it, no losses, that would be ideal. Well, what insurance policy would be some of the additives or extenders that are available to us. So I'm going to talk just a few minutes about those, and just remind you that we do have some help. Here's a circular that we have available for you. If you want details, this would be a good one to look at. But I'll give you some simple information. So certainly you're aware of urea. We can lose a substantial amount of N in a very short time if we just surface apply it. And the chemistry behind it is actually pretty simple. There's an enzyme called urease that works rapidly on the urea. It can convert it to a gas, and then we'll lose it by volatilization. So we want to slow this down. And so here's a quick summary. I got this from South Dakota State. Just a summary of urea management practices to minimize or prevent volatilization if you just surface apply. And the first bullet says, yeah, of course, delay application under high-risk conditions. And you guys are, I'm sure, aware of them. They include high pH soils. Anybody have them? High residue, surface residue, high temperatures, and also if we have wet soil surface and maybe just some mist, something like we had yesterday or Sunday evening, only in the summer, just real light temp, or excuse me, a hundredth or two several times, just enough maybe to dissolve the pellet, but not enough to move it into the soil. That's not good. We're going to lose a lot if we don't have sufficient rain, as in ideally a ½ inch or more in one event to move it into the soil. Or tillage can help. So we want to avoid those high-risk conditions, get the N in the soil. There's another means, or we have some products that can give us a little bit of time to work with. Or there's a controlled release and fertilizer, and there's some products out there. Remember that enzyme urease? Well, we do have inhibitors. And you guys are aware of at least this trade name, agrotane. Been around a long time. It works well, and it gives us, as well as we're pretty sure these other trade names, at least 10 days of time between a surface application and then when we are getting nervous about, hey, we got to get the N in the soil, we're going to have some major losses. So we've worked with arborite for several years here at the center. Appears to work quite well, similar to agrotane. This is another trade name we haven't worked with. And then the newest I'm aware of is from BASF called Linus. And that's under the same category of the urease inhibitor. We have not worked with it, and we'll assume it does work like it's supposed to. And then there's other sources of N losses, nitrification, simply where ammonium, a form of the N is changed to nitrate. When it's nitrate, it's repelled by the soil particles that have the same charge and negative charge, and so susceptible to movement by water. And we very very likely it could be moved below the root system if we have heavy rains. So again, I think this is something most of you are quite aware of. The other end of the spectrum would be is that we have end loss. It's in the soil, but because of very heavy saturated soils with moisture, we have what's called denitrification, and ultimately we lose them by volatilization. So these would be scenarios for what we call another group of products called nitrification inhibitors. And so here's a partial list of trade names. The most common would be under this active ingredient nitropyrin, and NSER, you've heard of that, and you've very likely heard of Insteed, which is a dry product, and not labeled on wheat yet, to my knowledge, but they're looking at that. And then we do have combination products. This is a short list. Super U I know is one, and there's others too that have both. They're urease inhibitors and also nitrification inhibitors. So I went through this really fast, but again, if you're looking at circular, you can get details. And these are the products that are listed, we know work. There's others not listed, and you maybe can think of one, I know I can, where it doesn't work in either category. So, and deficiency in corn looks like this. It starts in the leaf tip on the lower leaves, the more mature leaves, and then work along the midrib. With potassium deficiency, it's just the opposite, other than it does start from the leaf tip, and it is on the more mature leaves, but it'll stay on the edge of the leaf area, and then move in and as time goes on. So we're really talking about yellow crops today, so I'm not going to get into phosphorus. So here's maybe a little better picture of a corn plant with leaves that show the end deficiency symptoms. Lower leaves, starts from the tip and moves along the midrib. And certainly late in the season, we'll see some of this. And that might be a good thing, that we see some of this late in the season, because that means the plant has taken the end from the foliage, moving to the kernel, to the grain where it's supposed to. And if we see this late in the season, not excessive amount, but see it, that means that we're using as much N as possible, and maybe it was there for the plant instead of being lost early in the season. Okay, so what I've shown you and displayed to you so far, what's the deficiency here? Well, this is sulfur. And I know that because, or I'm pretty sure about it, because the upper leaves, the newest leaves, are yellow. That's compared to nitrogen deficiency. And the reason is that with nitrogen, the plant is able to mobilize the N to move it up to the newest tissue, because it has the ability then to preserve the newest tissue to help preserve yield on whatever plant it may be. But with sulfur, the plant isn't able to move it from down below to the newest growth. And so because of that lack of mobility, we see the deficiency symptoms on the top part of the plant for sulfur, but with nitrogen, if we see deficiency symptoms, it'll be typically on the lower part of the plant. So notice also with sulfur deficiency, the rocks laying in here. This is actually a cornfield from Wells County I took last season. Lower organic matter, this is actually on the hilltop. Just prime scenario for sulfur deficiency. And I assume that there were heavy rains either last fall or maybe in the spring or both that leads the sulfur away from this young root system of the corn plant. A couple more pictures of corn with sulfur deficiency. So we talked about the yellowing on the newest leaves, upper part of it. The plants can also be stunted. If you have a comparison nearby, maybe it's just a pocket that shows this, and nearby the plants are taller and certainly greener. And then you also oftentimes see striping as well. So the uptake of the corn plant of sulfur is, you'll see, very similar to N, isn't it? And so that's good. It means that you have some time to react. You can do some post-application of sulfur and still minimize or have no yield loss. So here's really the basics. Field locations, I talked about this already. We have coarse soils, low organic matter, those are candidates, along with abundant fall and or spring rain. When you have that combination, if you're wondering about sulfur application, it's very likely you'll get a response. But we want you to confirm it with a tissue analysis, not with soil tests, because soil test just doesn't do a good job of predicting the amount of S in the soil. The tissue analysis will. And so make sure that you sample the yellow area, and then if you have another part of the field, hopefully a major part of the field that's green, sample that, and then so you have a comparison. And our application rate is very simple. 10 pounds of sulfate sulfur will do the trick in most cases. Unless you have heavier soils, then we could go up to 20 pounds, but in most cases, this will do it for corn or for wheat, or for soybeans for that matter. Just one example of some research done here by a soils team this past season. This was for wheat, and the soil we suspected was low in sulfur. 10 to 20 pounds of actual sulfate sulfur was applied, and we saw a nice bump in that low rate, the 10-pound rate, both in yield and even a trend there for a bump a bit on protein. What do we do about this? Yeah, the field is yellow, but is it sulfur? Is it nitrogen? Is it both? Or maybe is it something else? Well, we don't know by looking at the picture, certainly. This is barley, by the way. So what we recommend would be is, hopefully you have other areas of the field that are green, soil sample those, as well as take tissue analysis, and do the same in this area, in the yellow area. Soil sample, take tissue analysis. Because you might have the tendency, okay, my barley is just getting going here, it's yellow, I'll apply N. That might be the worst decision that you made for this crop, for several reasons. One is, what if it's only sulfur? You're applying N, you're increasing your costs, you're applying N, and you had multi-barley, now you have high protein feed barley. And number 3 is, if it is sulfur deficiency, applying N will make the sulfur deficiency worse and reduce yields. Okay? I know it's a hassle, the soil sample, the plant tissue analysis, especially in 2 parts of the field. Then you gotta have a lot of patience to wait for the lab results to come, but it can pay big dividends for you. Maybe it'll say apply N and S, or maybe there's some other problem out there. If it is the case where you're sufficient on N and S, our recommendation would be to apply sulfur first, and preferably before rain, so it moves in, and then wait maybe a week or so, apply the N. But don't wait too long either, because we want to make sure that we're not in the jointing stage, or it'll have minimal impact yet on yield with the post-application of either one of these nutrients. And then finally, zinc. As you're probably well aware, if you're a corn grower, zinc will respond to low zinc levels. And as well as flax and dry bean and potatoes would be the 4th crop. So this is a picture I took a few years ago in Stutzman County. Typically the zinc deficiency symptoms, if they're going to show, it'll be typically about the 4th leaf stage when we see them, most definitely. It does look a bit like sulfur, but notice there'll be more prominent striping, and then this is extreme case of zinc deficiency. So we'll talk a little bit about timing of application. In the case of zinc, if you see plants like this, even at the 4 leaf stage, you've probably realized some yield loss. And maybe that's true in sulfur and nitrogen, but we can almost guarantee that you'll have some yield loss if you're at that 4 to 5 leaf stage in corn. Of course, at that stage, 2 of the yield factors have been initiated. One is the ear development has begun, and then also the number of rows on the cob has been determined at the 4 to 5 leaf stage. So when you have a sick-looking plant like this, yeah, there's some downward pressure on yield potential. So what can we do? Well, in this trial in 2007, this was low testing for zinc. Typically, if our soil test indicates less than 1 part per million, it'd be good to apply zinc. The best for long-term management would be to broadcast apply zinc sulfate. 10 pounds of actual, that'd be like 30 to 35 pounds of zinc sulfate. That'll give you about 10 pounds, and that'll be good for several years. Not only for the corn crop that year, but also for following crops such as dry bean or flax. So you can see statistically we had variability in the yields in that trial, but certainly trends there for some nice bumps on yield with zinc application when we have a low testing soil for the element. In this case, we had some experimental seed treatments that seemed to work well, and foliar application zinc worked well. And then this is from the trial we conducted last year, 2013, low yielding corn trial. Notice the soil test was again low, only 0.6 part per million. We fully applied a quart of chelated product, and had a fairly low level of sulfur, but this is adequate. It was applied at D6 stage. Statistically, not a yield increase, but certainly the yield is going the right direction. So that's a quick run through on some reasons for having yellow corn and wheat. And you can maybe apply this to some other crops as well.
What variety of wheat was that wheat in the 50s, protein around the 70s?
I didn't manage the trial, so I don't know. I'm guessing it wasn't Fowler. Yeah, I'm not sure. Anybody on staff that?
Barlow, I think it was.
So if there would be a climatic condition that would make things yellow, like, would there be like a scenario for us, like heat canker or wind damage or something like that? You know, like some kind of criteria that would give us an idea that was maybe what it was.
So in other words, there can be other reasons for having the yellow crop other than nutrient deficiencies or lack of the nutrient being available to the crop. And yeah, there could be a lot of just environmental things, and you quoted heat canker, that certainly would be one. It might be just, in the case of corn especially, just poor development of the young root zone, or the young root system, or maybe it's soil compaction, or maybe sidewall compaction. Maybe planted a little bit too soon, and the roots just aren't able to extend out and not able to uptake the nutrients that it needs.
Cool, too cloudy, not growing.
All that stuff we have every year. Just remember, there's other things other than nutrients that may cause a yellow crop.
So if you spread urea and it doesn't rain, will it just be locked? Like say you have an interweed and you just go spread it and it's supposed to rain, and it doesn't rain, will it just be locked?
There'll be some that'll make it to the plant, but yeah, so we have the adverse conditions like I mentioned, those factors, in particular the high temperatures, just really light rains, irritating rains, the 1 or 200s here and there that I can't get in the field, but it doesn't do any good for incorporating the urea. You know, those scenarios, in the high residue, if we do this in no-till winter wheat, yeah, we can have substantial losses. I have in other slide presentations some estimates of what the loss is. And certainly after a week, we can see 30% loss, and after 2 weeks, 50, 75% loss. Yeah, we won't say 100% loss, but it'll be, if it was animated, you'd see lots of dollars in